And John McMullen is joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline, as always, at 4 o'clock, Monday through Friday on 97.3 ESPN. John, how was your 4th of July?
Spectacular. Happy Independence Day, boys. A little late, but you deserve it. Hanging with Hendricks and Hennig. Or is it Hennig and Hendricks?
Well, right now it's
That's
Hendricks and
tough to
Hennig,
say.
and until Dashawn decides to bail on me, then it's just me.
Hey!
I can't get in that because my name doesn't begin with an H. It's very disappointing to me.
Well, John, you're always welcome on our show if you ever want to come on, or we do call you to come on. So just know that you're always welcome. How about that?
I always appreciate it.
John, before we get into our two-a-days, I do want to ask you about a comment that Todd Gurley made that made me chuckle earlier today. Todd Gurley said, "I want to thank God for Coach McVay," and it kind of gets me back to the thing with you always talk about, John, the fact of how we don't always understand the impact coaches have on players. And you look at what McVay did with that Rams team. Jared Goff was supposed to be a bust. Todd Gurley isn't what we thought he was going to be. All of a sudden, you change the coach, you change the offense, and all of a sudden, these guys are Pro Bowlers. So, I think we sometimes overlook the value of coaching in the NFL.
Yeah, we shouldn't. I think one of the issues with Chip Kelly, if you go back to him, was his mentality that he kind of thought that he was the star, his scheme was the star. And this is a talent-driven league, but that's not to say that coaching isn't important, because it is. And Sean McVay was a perfect example of that, and his ability to turn Jared Goff around so quickly. It's kind of spawned off. They're trying to do the same exact thing in Chicago after Mitchell Trubisky had such a bad rookie season, bringing in Matt Nagy to be the head coach, trying to do a similar thing. So they can have a huge impact, and we saw it obviously right here in Philadelphia. Doug Peterson, in his aggressiveness as a play caller, his willingness to use all 4 downs, very innovative in that aspect of it, and obviously it resulted in the first Super Bowl in franchise history. So, yeah, coaching is very, very important in this league, and a guy like Gurley certainly understands it, because as young as he is, he's seen both sides of the fence. Jared Goff would probably give you a similar explanation.
Here on the Sports Bash, we've been doing two-a-days with John McMullen, who writes for 97.3 ESPN.com, as well as Get More Sports, where he gets all of his NFL coverage there. This week it is the AFC and NFC South. So let's start on the AFC, John, with the Colts. It pretty much all comes down to Andrew Luck, does it not? If this guy is healthy, if this guy is ready to go, then the Colts should be a contender, right?
Yeah, I mean, it does. I don't think there's a team, obviously, that's the most important position, arguably, in sports, quarterback in the NFL. But even when you sort of magnify it and just into that position, I don't think there's a bigger potential swing in this league than the Colts with Andrew Luck versus the Colts without him. And by the way, I say that knowing Indianapolis probably has one of the better backup quarterbacks in the league as well. But that's just how impactful he is and has the potential to be. All you have to do is look at his first 3 years, 11 wins, 11 wins, 11 wins, and they reach the AFC Championship game. Then the injuries start, and they completely fall apart. And remember what they were before Andrew Luck got there, a 2-14 team. So he was kind of that guy on the crux of joining that category everybody likes to talk about, whether you want to call them elite quarterbacks, superstar quarterbacks, whatever term you want to use. He was right there before the injury started.
New head coach Frank Reich. You got to see Frank a lot during his time in Philadelphia the last 2 years. What are your thoughts on Frank Reich, who had a very good career, very successful now in multiple locations as a offensive coordinator in the league? What are your thoughts on him now going to Indianapolis to basically take over a team in a situation that was a frayed and rough situation for the last few years?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well deserved. I think Frank did a tremendous job, obviously, here as sort of Doug Peterson's right-hand man, and he was the guy that Doug worked with most closely to cobble together the game plans each and every week that were so successful. And in a lot of ways, I think for the Eagles, that's going to be the biggest question mark when we talk about X's and O's and players. I think their ability or inability to replace Frank Reich and John DeFilippo is going to sort of tell the story of the Eagles season. But as far as the Colts, they got a very good coach, and he's in a situation where I don't think there's a lot of patience in the NFL these days. That the years sort of when you got 5-year plans, they don't exist anymore. But he will have a little bit of rope, probably 2 years or so to get this thing going in the right direction. And he's proven, I mean, obviously he had a long career as a backup to Jim Kelly, one of the better backups in the NFL for a long time. He knows the quarterback position, and he's got an opportunity to work with one of the more talented quarterbacks in this league. Question is Andrew Luck ever going to be healthy again?
John, you just hit the nail right there with Andrew Luck, and is he ever going to be healthy again? Bringing Frank Reich in, you just talked about it. When Andrew's healthy, this team is a bona fide playoff team. You look at the other three teams, though. Tennessee got better. Jacksonville is a Super Bowl contender. And then you look at Houston Texans with Deshaun Watson and his surgeons. Even if Andrew is healthy, can this team realistically compete in this division?
Yeah, I think they can because he's that good. But you're right. This division for a long time was considered to be the worst in the AFC. It's no longer that. And every team is on the upswing. And Jacksonville is one of the few legitimate contenders on the AFC side. I think the NFC side is very, very deep. In the AFC, you kind of obviously start with New England, Pittsburgh, then Jacksonville probably, and there's not a lot of other teams you think could probably make a run towards the Super Bowl. And you're right, Houston, remember, not only are they getting Deshaun Watson back, who was spectacular in his rookie season until the injury, they're also getting J.J. Watt back. They're also getting Whitney Merciless back. So they're going to be better. And Tennessee's done a lot of things. New coach, obviously. They have that Patriots mentality from John Robinson, and now Mike Vrabel's there. Brought in Malcolm Butler, Deion Lewis. You can see Patriots all over the place, how they're trying to go in what direction for that particular organization. And then you have the Colts, and it all depends on a guy who hasn't thrown a football in 18 months. So anybody who's trying to say, look, it's going to be fine, he's going to be healthy this time around, I can't believe that until I actually see it. But if he's Andrew Luck before the injury, they're going to be a good football team because he's that good.
John, one of the issues for the Colts has been defense over the last couple of years. We know that Hooker is coming off that knee injury. They hope he's cleared in time for training camp. But did the Colts do enough this offseason between free agency and the draft to legitimately put that defense in a position to help keep them in games?
Well, I don't think they did. It doesn't look good on paper. One of the guys Frank brought over from the Eagles is Najee Good. You kind of know what Najee was here, just a special teams player when he's forced into action, wasn't very effective. He's in the conversation to be their starting middle linebacker. That's not good. And their front seven as a whole just doesn't have a ton of talent. So it is a team that is kind of going to be bad. If Andrew Luck can't be out there, this is going to be one of the worst teams in the NFL because it is not a talent-laden roster. And it really does come down to the fact that you're looking for a superstar player to elevate the rest of the team. And if he's not there or if he's not 100%, this is not going to be a very good football team. Simple as that.
What is your overall thought of how the Colts will finish 2018. Where do you see them stacking up in the totality of a very deep AFC South?
Well, and that's kind of what I said. I mean, this is a team that could have – you kind of go into every NFL season and have a beat and can kind of predict how a team is going to do within, say, 3 or 4 games. Not the Colts. I mean, they could be a 10-win team if Luck is playing 16 games. If he's not, they could be a 2-win team. That's how bad they are. So you could see a drastic change in fortune if it's another year where Andrew's not going to be there. I could see this being the worst team in the NFL. I really could. If he is there, I can see him making the playoffs. And that's how important he is to that organization, and that's how good he is.
John McMullen joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. Here on the Sports Bash, we're doing 2-a-days. We take one team from each conference as we lead up to the start of training camp. The teams who could be fighting with the Eagles as the Eagles try to defend their Super Bowl championship. John, let's flip it over to the NFC South, the Atlanta Falcons. This team was just in the Super Bowl a couple of years ago. They made some interesting additions. They drafted Calvin Ridley, which is interesting because a guy who's holding out is also a wide receiver. That is Julio Jones. John, he still has 3 years left on that contract. I believe it pays him, $46 million. So are they going to be able to reconcile the issues between the Falcons and Jones before the start of the season?
Yeah, ultimately, I think they'll get something done, and it'll probably be a shift and try to give them a little more guaranteed money because all of that guaranteed money is kind of all used up. And obviously, still, if he's not the best receiver in football, he's number 2 or number 3. So they realize how important he is, how good he is, and they need him on the football field. And then you have, obviously, Matt Ryan is the highest paid player in the history of professional football. He understands it. Everybody on that team and that organization is on the same page, and they realize how important Julio Jones is. And then you sort of go from there. You mentioned Calvin Ridley. They also have Mohamed Sanu. If anything, they potentially could have the best receiving corps in football, but that's only if Julio's there and happy. Because once you start those dominoes falling, and if Sanu is one of the best number 2 receivers in football, but if you move him up to number 1, not nearly as effective. Ridley should be able to dominate as a rookie. He's never going to see a double team. He's just not. But then if you have to elevate him to a number 2, the Falcons are aware, and they understand how important he is, and they'll get something done.
John, when you look at big picture with the Atlanta Falcons, Josh just mentioned they were in the Super Bowl 2 years ago and had one of the, if not the biggest collapse I've ever seen. Where do you see this team, coming out of the offseason in the training camp in the pecking order of the NFC? It's so deep, and you just had 2 other teams in their division that made the playoffs last year.
Yeah, I mean, they were a good team last year. It wasn't that bad. I think the issue was going from Kyle Shanahan to Steve Sarkisian. On the offensive side of the football, I think they made a mistake probably there. Should have went with one of Kyle's lieutenants and kept the same system instead of revamping. Now that they're a year out, I think things will be better. We just mentioned their talent at receiver. Obviously, you know how good Matt Ryan is. You know how good their backfield is and how deep it is. So there are, as far as skill position players, offensively, Atlanta's as good as it gets in this league. The problem, as you mentioned, and I just alluded to before, there's so many good teams in the NFC. It starts with the Eagles, obviously. If you think about the NFC North, how good the Vikings are, how good the Packers are, if Aaron Rodgers are there, even the Lions with Matthew Stafford. And then the South might be the deepest division of all with the Falcons, the Saints, the Panthers. And then you have even San Francisco is coming with Jimmy Garoppolo and the Rams, who might be the most talented team of them all. There is just a ton of good teams on the NFC side, but Atlanta is one of them.
John, I know we talk a lot about the offense with the Falcons. Obviously, a lot of big names: Ryan, Jones, Freeman, Coleman. But the defense made a major step forward last year. Dan Quinn, a former defensive coordinator with the Seahawks, they went from 25 points per game to 19.7 points per game last season. Can the defense continue the trend upward, John? And will the defense be a key for them next season?
Yeah, I think it will because, as you mentioned, they brought in Dan Quinn, obviously, and they're trying to replicate that Seattle cover 3 philosophy. And the more you play it, the better you get, and the quicker you get. And they've tried to build the same way. They have a ton of athleticism in the defensive backfield. Where they haven't been able to duplicate it is up front, and really as far as the edge rushing and the pass rushing goes. Vic Beasley's got to have a better year, a bounce-back year, and they probably need a complement as well as far as the edge rushing. But the back seven, hey, it's really good. And you know, Deion Jones is one of the best 3-down linebackers in football. And as I said, if you look at their corners, you have Trufant, you have Alford, you have Neal at safety, a ton of talent on the back seven. The question is, can they get to the quarterback?
Speaking of getting to the quarterback, is the development of Takk McKinley at this point the most important thing for the Falcons, considering the fact that, look, you don't spend that kind of draft pick on a guy and him only ever cap out at 6 sacks. I know Beasley had a down year last year. I know Brooks Reed didn't give them all that they expected. So is McKinley the guy they're possibly going to look at and say, look, we really need you to step up or else?
Yeah, and kind of what I said. I mean, Vic, you know, the stats weren't there, but you know Vic Beasley's going to be a good pass rusher, but you need that complement. And remember, Adrian Claiborne's gone. He obviously had a big game against the Cowboys and at least was a veteran presence that could get some things done on the pass rush. Now he's gone, so yeah, they need somebody to step up, and that's the most logical candidate. The question is, can he do it? I don't know. And that's my biggest question when I look at the Atlanta Falcons is, are they going to be able to get a consistent pass rush from week to week? On paper, to be honest, it doesn't look very good, but that's where they have to get better.
John, Dashawn mentioned it. It's a deep NFC South. You got the Panthers, you got the Saints. The Bucs definitely got better this offseason, at least on defense. So where do you see the Falcons falling among the NFC South participants?
Well, I think it's going to be between the Falcons and Saints. I think the Bucs, too many issues with Jameis Winston. They still have to decide what way they want to go with that franchise as a whole. And I think the Panthers, you mentioned it earlier in the week with Pete and Mike. I'm not a big fan of North Turner. I think they're going to go in a downward direction. So that leaves two teams standing. That's the Atlanta Falcons and the New Orleans Saints. They're both tremendously talented on the offensive side of the football. They both have great quarterbacks, MVP-level quarterbacks. They both have weapons all over the field. So you saw the spike the Saints took defensively, and we just talked about the Falcons and the talent they have in the back seven at least. I think whoever has the better defense between those two teams is likely going to come out of that division.
John, any thoughts on this revision to the fumble rule by the NFL, or do you think it's just a bunch of hogwash?
No, there really wasn't much to it, and they just came out with the new rule book. I think, obviously, the thing that's going to overshadow everything is how they call the helmet rule. And until we see it in practice, we don't know. We don't know how it's going to be. And I hope it's sort of like the targeting rule. But as far as the fumble, that's basically more of anything just a stat-based rule. If you're kind of a running back and you fumble the ball and immediately recover it, it's not going to be a fumble. And it's really not going to have a lasting impact on the game.
He is John McMullen on 97.3 ESPN.com. Eagles Insider for all your Eagles news. Go to 97.3 ESPN.com and follow John at JF McMullen, as well as all the NFL news, his coverage at Get More Sports covering the NFL. And John joins us every day here on the Sports Bash at 4 o'clock on 97.3 ESPN on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. John will be back tomorrow as we wrap up the NFC and AFC and NFC South, easy for me to say, previews as we lead up to training camp. John, appreciate your time on a Thursday.
Thanks, John.
Hey, thank you, guys.